Okay, can I get there? Can I get this online?
Guys, this guy is working. You can hear us. Okay.
Yeah, can you hear us? Hello. Okay, speaker is just coming up now.
Shall I try again?
Hi, Vera, can you hear us now?
Sort of.
Yes, perfect.
Yes,
Thank you.
perfect. All right. Thank you. We're going to start now. Is that okay, Vera?
Perfect. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you.
Please, can you do? They can't hear you. No. I think that this is.
Vera, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're going to start off now. All right. So thank you all. Let's just get straight to the business of the day. This is the second panel of our session, which I co-organized with my colleague, Vera. She's the one online joining us from London. The section is titled Public History and the Critical Museology, Rethinking African Cultural Property Across the Globe. And we are privileged to have our four panelists for this panel present. We have three of them here three, yeah. No, we have two here and two online. Sorry about that. So each panelist, you have 15 minutes for your presentation, and I think we'll wait for the four of you to present your paper. Then the Q&A will come after and discussion. So, so the first presenter is Jasmine Cuevas, who is a graduate student at the Africana Studies at the Cornell University. She will be talking on illegitimizing institution, excavating Mexico's African roots. So the floor is yours. Do you have your presentation already on there?
Yes, I can the presentation. How's your voice? Can you all hear me or didn't I? Okay, perfect.
If you can't hear us at some point, Vera, please let us know. Are they still there?
Yeah.
If you're gonna go to the top corner, present.
Presents. Click on the present in the top corner. Right?
Perfect. As it loads, I'll go ahead and start. Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Jasmine Gine Cuevas, and I am an academic whose research follows Afro-Mexican studies. Specifically, what I do is I'm in a very small discipline, Afro-Mexican studies, but nonetheless, all of the foundational scholars have agreed on one thing that we must follow, and that is to find the African root of Mexico. And so, well, for myself, I find one of Mexico's African roots, because we know that roots are plural, in Yoruba's lasting impact on Mexican systems of knowledge. I am just as concerned in how to relay the messages to community, since community is who this is for. Thus, my work does a lot with museums and does a lot with different cultural centers because I'm trying to access and trying to play with different mediums and relaying my research. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I am an Afro-Chicana. What that means, Chicana, Mexican-American. Grew up in the States, but specifically from the border region. So I could literally walk to Mexico from my house in El Paso. And I'm first and foremost an activist more than I am an academic who is concerned with African and indigenous sovereignty in Mexico. a locale that, due to its Latinness, the essence that because we speak a language other than English in the hemisphere, that somehow we are past the neo-colonial. But I mean, Spanish itself is an inherently colonial language. And these Latin American countries like to operate by the myth of mestizaje. And what mestizaje is a racial mixture. It's what Latin America tends to operate on, to say that we don't have to think about race because we're a post-racial society. And so because of that, there's no need to give it attention, but it tends to instead reiterate violences that we find. And this is specifically in Mexico, but you'll find it also throughout different Latin American countries as well. Next slide, please. Today's presentation, Illegitimizing Institutions, Excavating Mexico's African Roots, I'm providing a critical historiography of predominantly the United States, based exhibitions that deal with Afro-Latin America and Afro-Latin American history. I start with the most comprehensive exhibition to date, which took place in 2006 with the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. And that was called The African Presence in Mexico from Younger to Present. And then I do jump quite a bit in time to 2024 to 2025, because there were three very exceptional exhibitions that took place this past year. That is Colonial Crossings, Art, Identity, and Belief in the Spanish Americas, which took place in Ithaca, New York, Visibility and Resistance, New Acquisitions, Contemporary Afro-Mexican Photography, which took place at the Schomburg, which I'll talk about in a bit, and Elizabeth Catlett, A Black Revolutionary and All That It Implies, which is a traveling exhibition, but started in the Brooklyn Museum, then went to the National Gallery of Art, and it will round out its conclusion where we have the African Presence in Mexico, which is the National Museum of Mexican Art, Chicago. And so thematically, they're very exceptional exhibitions because, like I tell you, 2006 is where we have the most comprehensive survey. But to date, nothing has even come close to it. It's been, it has not had the respect it needs. Afro-Mexico specifically, but Afro-Latin America also. And so I looked at 2024 and 2025 and these specific ones because it was exceptional to see how all of these just started to emerge at once. Specifically in the Cultural Center, United States, you have New York City, right? And so that's where we have like an epicenter, but also in these different locales in the East Coast, which people go specifically for academic research and to learn on the subjects. These selected exhibitions are rather expansive in their temporal settings, beginning with the colonization of Mexico forward, and they reveal, as academic Michelle Wright talks about, epiphenomenal time. And in epiphenomenal time, what she says is when we are thinking about Blackness, because North America tends to situate Blackness as Middle Passage Blackness, they can't conceive something out of African American Blackness, that we must think then when and where is Blackness on these locales. Therefore, as I catalog these exhibitions to present a critical historiography on African material culture in Mexican and Mexican American museums and cultural centers, I press to you all how, and if so, to what extent can African autonomy be represented in these neocolonial institutions that really work to preserve the aims of the state, and especially a state as vile as the United States. Next slide, please. Yet, this also comes at a very precarious time in the United States, one that's unprecedented. I don't know how many of y'all have been following along, but the deportations are to quite a massive a scale. The state has really intensified ethnocide like we've never seen before. And don't get me wrong, we've had deportation and we've had them targeting Latin Americans. And when I say Latin Americans, we know Haitians, we know everyone from Central America and all those who go through Mexico to pass to get into the United States. But migrants and immigrants, in large part in the Latin Americas, are currently enduring now in the United States kidnapping, detainment, and deportation. There's a de facto civil war brewing, and of course, what seems to be the brink of a third world war. You could go to the next one. Thus, radically sitting with the unrest of to what function can our institutions operate is critical. It is of ever necessity as the global north is cracking down on its dissent to deter subjects from further recognizing their role in the suppression of the global south, in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Haiti, and in Palestine. Nonetheless, this is precisely because of the United States' hand in global affairs. And it's ever the more why critically returning to these cultural institutions that are sites for producing and propagating knowledge is essential. And so this critical historiography is doing so while searching for Mexico's African roots. Like I was telling you all about, the seminal and most comprehensive survey that we have on Afro-Mexican art to date, the 2006 one, the African presence in Mexico from younger to present, and it's actually divided into 3 different parts. From younger to present, the first part was actually 3 parts to it, and the parts are the African presence in Mexico from younger to present, which also takes the larger name of the exhibition, but it's also the first part of the survey. The second part, who are we now? Roots, resistance, and recognition. And so what this was talking about, the National Museum of Mexican Art in the United States is based in Chicago. And it was looking at the different ways in which we have the Black Panthers and also activist groups like the Young Lords who were fighting for solidarity and for their own conditions within the States. And then the last one that they had within this exhibition was common goals, common struggles, and common ground. And so in that one, what they were looking about is they returned back to the Chicago community because as they were taking this look to, a transnational lens, they also wanted to focus on the immediate community. So they were seeing ways in which Black and Brown populations were getting together. And I say Black and Brown in quotation marks because that's not all the time very specific. And that also tends to erase Afro-Latinos. And so this exhibition, it also toured, in addition to its home institution, all throughout North America. And so some of the places that it went where you have very highly populated Mexican-American areas, Chicago, Albuquerque, Washington, D.C., and then it went to Mexico as well, Monterrey, Veracruz, Anacostia Museum. It came back to the States. Sorry, I'm rushing a bit because I realize my time is running slim. And so I think very sensibly, this exhibition focused on Yanga. And who is Yanga? Yanga is known as the liberator of the Americas. Yanga had a rebellion in 1570. It's said that he's from Gabon, but that's still, we're not too sure. But he led a rebellion with African, Afro-descended, indigenous, and Afro-indigenous peoples against the Spanish crown to have their own enclave in the mountains. And so for 30 years, they lived unscathed by attempts of the Spanish crown to isolate them, to deter them. And it was in the year that 1618, they created a ceasefire. And in 1619, the town of Yanga came together to have the first liberated Afro-Mexican city in the Americas. The next one that we're going to be looking at is fast forward to 2024, and I really want you all to pay attention to that shift in time. 2024, this is at the Herbert Johnson Museum, located in Cornell in Ithaca, New York, so upstate New York, pretty close to Canada. And in July of 2024, it first opens its doors to colonial crossings, art, identity, and belief in the Spanish Americas. It was the first ever exhibition since its opening in 1973 to ever focus on colonial Latin America. And so in that aspect, I say colonial Latin America, and they did very good in thinking about spirituality, belief, race, but there's so much more that we need to keep thinking about. And so the exhibition grapples with the inherently sinister nature of colonization and the shared spiritual practices throughout art that inevitably spread in globalization. It does its part to demonstrate that while there is sharedness in the Hispanophone, that we also need to think a bit more expansively because there were 5 ports at one time that were going to Mexico. And so I think they did a good job of starting this exhibition with the map here. It's a global a survey that shows us the global political, spiritual interconnection and contention against indigenous African, and also talking a lot about the Asian population that was brought into the Americas and how they were able to navigate identities while suffering from empire. Yes. I thought it was really important to include this. If you talk to anyone who does Latin American history or Latin American art history and you ask them about race, they're likely going to tell you about casta paintings or caste paintings. And what they are is an invention of race. It was a process in which you got different, I think, like ideas to make identity. So, for example, a Spaniard who came over to the Americas was a criollo. And then if they were to miscegenate with different groups, you would then have different mixtures that came, and there were different hierarchies that were built on that. So if there was an indigenous person and an African person, they then made some like different a lobo, which means wolf. And so it was a really derogatory system in order for the Spanish to hold on to their whiteness in the system in which they were overpopulated, in which they were outnumbered. In this, I think what was highlighted the most was spirituality throughout the Americas. And what I thought was interesting while going through, the students actually put this together at the museum, but they gave a tour of it. And so while going through the different spiritual ones, I asked, what is this one? And I'm referring to the Alfredo lamp, which seemed to be different in time because this one over here is 18th century. And the person who said it, she's like, oh yeah, we put it in, but I'm not necessarily sure that it goes with the rest of the exhibition. And with her saying that, I think it's because you could tell, well, the diaspora that comes from it, and it comes from Cuba, but I thought it was important to bring attention to this because this one has the most agency as compared to what you have with the Costa paintings and then a baptismal that is by no means, I think, a dignified portrait. If we could get the next one, please. Shortly after colonial crossings, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is located in Harlem, New York, had visibility and resistance. The Schomburg Center in New York is a center named after Alfonso Schomburg, who was an Afro-Puerto Rican man, and specifically he wanted to more archive culture. And so in this one, it ran from August 9th to December 2024. It was pretty short in its live, but there were different acquisitions in which you have people who are directly working for Mexico today, contemporary photography. The exhibition synopsis stands firm in the realization of Blackness when thought of in the Mexican imaginary, and that's the case even though it is thought of, it's something that tends to be exoticized if it's not forgotten. And so it's pretty deliberate in the way that they have this, that they let the artists talk for themselves instead of having a curator voice. What we have here is, actually, this is really important. This comes from the Costa Chica, which just yesterday was hit with a very intense hurricane. And so there are Black Mexicans all throughout Mexico. But in the coastal areas is where you're going to have a big concentration of them. And this hurricane just yesterday had knocked out a bunch of livelihoods. And so that's a picture from the Costa Chica there. If you look to the right-hand side, that's a picture from Tijuana, where you have Haitian migrants who are waiting to cross over the border. You go next. Sorry, I'm going to go a bit faster because I'm running past my time. Okay, Elizabeth Catlett, a Black revolutionary and all that implies. Elizabeth Catlett was an African-American expat turned Mexican citizen who did very political work. In the year 1970, she was denied a visa to go speak at a conference. And we were told that, she instead delivered the speech on the phone saying that she was refused her visa, that on the grounds that as a foreigner, there was a possibility I would interfere in social or political problems, and thus I constituted a threat to the well-being of the United States of America. To that degree, and to the portion that the United States constitute a threat to Black people, and to that degree and more, I do hope that I have earned the honor, for I have been, and am currently, and always hope to be a Black revolutionary and all that implies. Elizabeth Catlett was forced to bring in her position as an expat, as not being able to get back to the United States, she couldn't cross over her works. And so, in a lot of the sense, they actually had to send them over the border and smuggle it in. And her work, she says she has two peoples that she says is Black people and Mexicans. And so here, this is called There's a Woman in Every Color. You'll see the different cut, but to the side, we have traditional Mesoamerican coloring. And so because I'm past my time a bit, I just want to end here and I hope we can get more into the question portion so I give the rest of the panelists their due. But what I was finding in these different cultural institutions and these different museums is there was a limitation in the ways they were allowed to say certain things. And so the Elizabeth Catlett that I showed you, that one came from the Brooklyn Museum, but it's a traveling exhibition. After that, it went to Smithsonian National Gallery of Art, and they took out the last portion of the title. All it is was a Black revolutionary. They took out and all it implies. And I think that's likely because the Smithsonian is an institution of the state and it can't say certain things. It's going to be ending its round again at the National Museum of Mexican Art. We see also the Schomburg Museum, one that was built by Afro-Puerto Ricans, was able to exercise a bit more of autonomy, whereas we have the African presence in Mexico, which did very well and was in 2006. Still not quite thinking about the Afro-Latin American identity, like that was only something of the colonial past. And so when we talk about race in Latin America in the States, it tends to be done so only through the colonial setting. We can't imagine something prior to that or something outside the hemisphere. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesmai. I think, yeah, we just move on to the second presenter, then we'll come back for questions. Can we check online? Is Katerina is online? Is she online?
Yes, hello.
Okay, thank you. Can you stop sharing this so that she can share your slide? So can you share your slide while I
Yes.
introduce briefly? So Katarina Kolovko, I hope I does it well. She's an independent scholar and she works on security, immigration, and crime, I hope. And today she will be talking about Cannibal Museology, escape from categories to disrupt the technologies of conquest. So the stage is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can. And we can hear you very clearly.
Okay, great. So, hello, my name is Katia Golovko. Today I will speak as an artist and writer, and this presentation is based on an article I wrote and that is published online, and if anyone is interested after, I can share the link. It's a short, the presentation I'm giving is a short version of the text. It's an artistic and critical meditation on the ethnographic museum and its intrinsic limitation. My talk is divided in 6 short parts that try to trace a path of thinking I followed while working on this research. So, 1. I began thinking about museums and cannibalism while reading Cannibal Metaphysics by Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro. His work on Tupinamba cannibalism describes a complex system of capturing, cohabiting with, and ritually consuming enemies in the context of warfare. This form of cannibalism was not about elimination, but about relationship. Incorporating the other required an exit from oneself. The exterior was constantly engaged in a process of interiorization, and the interior was nothing but movement towards the outside. This is the quote from Viveiros de Castro. Captives, often culturally similar to their captors, lived in supervised freedom, integrated into the community, and were fully aware of their fate. Their ritual execution was not an act of pity, but of vengeance and honor. Importantly, the Tupinamba recognized the full humanity of those they consumed. Exocannibalism, the consumption of those outside of one's group, was a way of socializing the enemy. It expressed a radical ontological incompleteness, the idea that others are necessary for one's own becoming. Vengeance was not a final act, but a generative cycle, a symbolic relationship between captor and captive, where death in foreign hands was both honorable and a call for reciprocal action. Without enemies, there would be no fists, no children, no time. Vengeance was a machine for producing life and continuity. Tupinamba cannibalism was a way of knowing the enemy's point of view. It privileged becoming and relation over fixed identity. As Viveiros de Castro writes, others were a solution, not a problem. 2. Boundaries. In contrast to Tupinamba cannibalism, which engages the other as a source of transformation, the life of Sarki Bartman exemplifies how colonial systems cannibalize existence itself. Sarki Bartman, also known as the Hottentot Venus, was a woman from South Africa, nowadays South Africa, whose life became a symbol of racial objectification. After losing her parents, she worked on colonial farms and was taken to Europe under false promises of fame. In 1810, she was exhibited in London, freak shows, paraded semi-nude, and subjected to public scrutiny. Though abolitionists attempted to intervene, Bartman, likely coerced, testified she was not forced. Her situation worsened in Paris, where she was displayed in degrading conditions and studied by anatomists like Georges Cuvier, who used her body to support racist theories. She died in poverty in 1815, likely forced into sex work. Even in death, her body was dissected and displayed, becoming a specimen in the service of racial science. Bartman's story is often told through the lens of captivity and objectification, yet she must be recognized as the subject of her own life. Her trajectory from birth in South Africa to death in Paris and eventual burial in 2002 marks a long continuum of racial violence. Her remains were returned to South Africa after prolonged negotiation, and she was buried in a national ceremony attended by the president. Her life and posthumous treatment exemplify what Denise Ferreira da Silva calls the wounded captive body in the scene of subjugation, a life consumed by the colonial gaze, transformed into an object and denied full humanity. 3. From cabinets of curiosity to human zoos and ethnographic museums, Western institutions have long exhibited human difference as spectacle. This trajectory, from freak shows to anthropozoological displays, reflects technologies of conquest and the rationalization of authority, with whiteness positioned as the normative standard. Exhibiting the other became a symbol of imperial power, modernity, and the capacity to dominate. Initially confined to elite audiences, the 19th century saw a surge of public interest in specimen through world fairs, circuses, and theaters. These displays, often profitable, emphasized ethnic singularity and physical difference, reinforcing colonial hierarchies. The case of Sarki Bartman, the so-called Hottentot Venus, marked a turning point in Europe's visual and scientific engagement with otherness. Ethnographic museums became spatial capsules of colonial ideology, treating human remains as scientific artifacts. This practice persisted until demands for restitutions gained momentum. In 2011, Berlin's Charité Medical University began returning remains taken during Germany's colonial war in Namibia. These repatriations, including 35 bodies returned in 2014, were part of a broad struggle to recognize genocide and restore dignity to the dead. Reframing these remains as ancestors rather than specimen challenges the dehumanizing logic of colonial science. The term human bodies itself interrogates how colonial institutions translated people into remains through disciplinary disavowal. Repatriation thus signals an epistemic shift from dehumanization to the reassertion of humanity. It reflects a broader reckoning with the classificatory systems that underpinned colonial violence and the museum's role in legitimizing it. 4. In her online lecture, Clementine Delise introduces the concept of the metabolic museum, framing the museum not as a static archive, but as a living, degenerative body. Through a series of metaphors, she describes the museum as a space of repentance, a rhetoric structure, and a physiological system that processes objects it receives. This metabolic framing reveals the museum's role in the material and epistemic violence of colonial knowledge production. Delise draws attention to the brutal intimacy between human and non-human matter within the museum. And using Armin Linke's photograph that I show on the slide, she illustrates how the museum enters into physical contact with the object, an encounter that follows the initial violence of fieldwork. This proximity, often framed as scientific engagement, is in fact a continuation of colonial extraction characterized by describing, naming, and exploiting. Thinking of cannibalism as a practice of the imperial machine, I thought about the process of digestion that makes visible the relationship between the material physical structure of the museum and the object. The museum institution strips the objects from their context and assimilates it into its own system. What emerges, displayed in vitrines, is not the object itself, but its excreted form, formatted to fit the epistemic order of modernity. This is not a relational encounter, but a process of engulfment, as Denise Ferreira da Silva describes a voracious consumption of difference in service of Western universalism. This logic stands in stark contrast to the Amerindian exocannibalism described by Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, where the other is not a mirror, but a destination. In that cosmology, incorporation requires transformation, not containment. The ethnographic museum, by contrast, institutionalizes difference, reinforcing imperial hierarchies through what Siraj Rasool calls the exhibitionary complex, a system that includes crucially the digestive complex that neutralizes and hierarchizes the other. 5. Now I would like to go to a fictional dimension of freedom where one person is not confined to the limits of one's own body. Eating flesh as a way to deal with ontological inconsistency is emphasized in the writing of Octavia Butler, and in particular in the Patternist series. The first novel of the series, Wild Seed, is situated first on the African continent and then in North America, where two immortals, Doro and Anyanwu, meet. Both characters embody malleable external forms capable of altering their outward appearance. Doro is an immortal who survives by killing others' consciousness and inhabiting their bodies, using their exterior form temporarily. In contrast, Anyanwu retains her own body, but can shapeshift into other beings, like a dolphin or a bird, by intimately reading their flesh. She describes this ability as reading flesh like a book, gaining knowledge directly from the body itself. It seems that you could misunderstand your books, she said. Other men made them. Other men can lie or make mistakes. But the flesh can only tell me that it is. What it is, it has no other story. This reveals not only her method of transformation, but also her unique embodied way of knowing. When Doro takes Anyanwu to North America on a slave ship, at some point of the journey, Anyanwu assumes the form of a dolphin. This symbolically connects her to the history of the Middle Passage, and in particular to those slaves who were thrown overboard by slave traders, and also to the speculative history of Drexians inhabiting the ocean. This is also her way to overcome the Cartesian boundary between humans and non-humans that was at the basis of the slave trade and of the technologies of the conquest. This way, Anyanwu opens up new routes for imagining the human as part of the complex ecology connecting living beings. 6. While both Tupinamba cannibalism and the ethnographic museum engage with difference and its physicality, they diverge sharply in their relational logic. The ethnographic museum, rooted in Western epistemology, is driven by the urge to catalog and define, treating objects as carriers of fixed essence. This framework imposes a singular worldview, limiting the possibility for alternative understandings or categorizations from the other. The museum's authority rests on ontological incompleteness and the dominant, often contextualizing mode of knowledge. In contrast, Tupinamba cannibalism embraces the other, not to confirm existing truths, but to expand perspective. As Eduardo Viveiros de Castro writes, the other is not a mirror, but a destination. In this cosmology, identity is shaped through incorporation and transformation, an ongoing movement between interiority and exteriority. The imposition and exit from the boundaries of the body is also one of the central themes of the work of Octavia Butler, who explores the imposed boundaries between self and the other, nature and culture, subject and object, putting emphasis on existing alternatives. Her work in some way can be brought to the general questioning of the nature of human, of the fact of being human, and opening space for post-humanist critiques of the modern episteme. Returning to the image of Sarki Bartman standing before the court, we are reminded of the body as a site of imposed meaning and resistance. Paul B. Preciado, in his address to the French Psychoanalytic Society, invokes Franz Kafka's Red Peter, an animal who becomes human not by desire, but as the only escape from captivity. This metamorphosis I mentioned in this talk as a refusal of fixed imposed identity, a movement beyond the cages of species, selves, and normativity. Anyango in Wild Seed, the Tupinamba cannibalism incorporate the other, not to dominate, but to become with. These are not acts of conquest, but of becoming. To live in transition is to affirm life as mutation. It is to embrace multiplicity as a vital force, not a deviation. And echoing Butler's parable of the talents and the mantra, God is change, such vision resists the logic of engulfment. Instead of absorbing difference into sameness, it opens space for opacity, for unknowability, for the other as destination. This logic of mutation disrupts the museum's impulse to fix, display, and define. It invites us to imagine institutions not as digestive systems that assimilate and excrete, but as porous, shifting bodies capable of transformation. Mutation becomes a method, an epistemology of movement, of refusal, of emergence. In this frame, the goal is not to escape one cage for another, but to dissolve the very architecture of captivity. Multiplicity is not a threat to coherence, but its redefinition. It is the condition of freedom. How can we obtain this in the museum? Is it even possible? I would like to finish with the words of Octavia Butler that could be also used as a guidebook for the work in museums. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. Thank you.
Please hang around for Q&A. We'd like to hear from you. I guess there are questions. And the next presenter, Mary, can you share your screen, please? Mary Otu is a graduate student at the University of Ibadan. She's joining us from Australia. She traveled to Australia, I think, 2 days ago or thereabouts. So I don't know what time she is over there. Anyway, so she'll be talking on breaking the glass case, reclaiming African cultural narratives in museums. Mary, the stage is yours, 15 minutes. You are muted if you can hear us, Mary. Hello, can you hear us?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
You can share your screen.
Okay. 1 minute.
Are you having problem?
Yes, but sorry, I'll be there now.
Can you do it in 30 seconds or
I'm coming. I think I opened it.
okay? Are you okay to go now?
I am, but it should.
Stop sharing. How much you can take a time to look for it while you go.
That's also fine.
Yeah, Mary, you can take your time to look for it. Why? Let's have the next presenter while you take your time to look for it. So yeah, and put yourself together.
Really ready. Sorry. I'm ready now. I've seen it.
Okay, share your screen
Yeah.
then and kick on. I think your time has dropped to 13 minutes.
Okay. Zoom. It's taking time to load. Okay. So share.
You can see.
Okay. So
Okay.
can you see my screen?
No.
Hello.
Hello, we can't see your screen. We can only see your face.
Okay, I think the next person should share. Let me solve this, please.
Okay, so let's go back to that. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So I think we're going to have Elena Sullivan, who is an assistant professor of cultural and art history at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She will be talking on contemporary art will not decolonize your museum, lessons from Belgium's Royal Museum for Central Africa. The stage is yours. Thank
All right.
you.
Great. Is there a way to see the slides on the screen?
Are you okay? Vera, can you see a slide on the screen on your hand?
Uh-oh.
I can see not in full screen, but I can see the slides.
Yeah, can you
You
go to
could go to
present?
full screen?
Okay, then go to is this supposed to present a slideshow?
Okay, well, the formatting might be off, it looks like, but I think I'll go ahead. Thank you everyone for coming today. I also want to thank our panel organizers for doing this big 3-part panel and emailing us from all over the world. Can you go back?
Go back, please. Oh, yes.
What is happening?
We have Zoom bombing. We have Zoom bombing here. Who's that? I think, or maybe by accident. But
I think it's by accident.
So,
Oh, that was in my presentation.
okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
okay, thank you.
And now there's a random drawing. Cool. So, I spent much of the 2010s in graduate school, traveling around the US, Europe, and Africa for research, and I visited many, many museums. Anyone who visits that many museums probably starts to notice a few patterns. Like, you might wonder if someone wrote a law that every museum has to have something by Ella Natsui on display. Or, you might wonder why art from the continent of Africa seems to always just be from the West Coast or Congo. I started to wonder about the role that was played by contemporary art in displays of so-called historical or traditional or ethnographic artwork from Africa. Next. At the British Museum, for example, you might be greeted by, next, the painting Free by Ghanaian artist Owusu Ankoma, which was made in 2007 and presented above the stairs leading down to the galleries. Next. Arriving downstairs, you'll likely notice these Mofo jumble figures made by the British Trinidadian artist Zach Ove in 2014. Next. In Amsterdam, at the Tropen Museum, next, you might come across the artwork Planets in My Head, Literature by Yinka Shonibare, though I believe that it's given a slightly more prominent place than it was given when I took that photo on the left. There are many reasons of why curators choose to include contemporary art within their African art galleries, including the fact that Africa is contemporary. But what I want to talk about today is how that contemporary art started to be positioned during the so-called decolonial turn in museums. Next. I will do so by focusing on Belgium's Royal Museum for Central Africa, which closed for renovation in 2013 and it reopened in 2018. I'll first give you a brief history of the museum before presenting some of the contemporary art on display there, and then dive into my discussion of what people might mean when they say that they're decolonizing a museum and what role contemporary art might have in that process. Next. The Royal Museum for Central Africa was founded in 1897 by King Leopold II, King of the Belgians and sovereign ruler of the Congo Free State. It was actually founded during the Brussels World's Fair of 1897 as the colonial section of that World's Fair, which featured a human zoo, and it was such a success that Leopold decided to build a permanent museum. And work on that main building began in 1905 and was completed in 1910, a few months after Leopold's death. Galleries in the museum showcased a wealth of raw material, can you go back, that you can see on the right, such as all available for investors. So things like rubber and various materials, and they highlighted the works of the so-called civilizing mission that was undertaken by Europeans in the colony. What's especially remarkable about this museum is that it didn't really change all that much over the 20th century, and it ended up giving the name Europe's Last Colonial Museum. Next. When I visited in 2013, for example, I could still visit the galleries that were celebrating exploits of Belgian soldiers and explorers in the Congo, which by then had been independent for over 50 years. This is all to say that it was a very big deal when it closed down in 2013 for a complete renovation. Next slide, please. While it was closed, the museum continued to host artists in residence. It acquired and commissioned a number of works by artists from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi, the latter of which actually became a Belgian colony after World War I, along with Rwanda. And it was during its closure that I actually got to know a few of the artists whose work was commissioned to be put on display. Then, in 2018, I was actually back in Belgium for the big reopening ceremonies and the press days and the whole hullabaloo, and I started to notice that there was a lot of attention being given to the contemporary art, and it seemed to be used as a symbol for the museum turning over a new leaf. So, for my dissertation, I decided to ask, what are these works of art doing in the museum, and what are they being asked to do? Next. The museum initially commissioned 2 works of art. Here we see Freddie Simba's Shadows, which memorializes Congolese who died in Belgium between the years of 1885 and 1908. And it's actually opposite of a memorial that was installed in the 1930s that was memorializing Belgians who died in Congo in that same time period. Next. They also commissioned Aimé Pane, who designed this sculpture called New Breath or Burgeoning Congo, to which he later added another sculpture, next, Lusinga's skull, and also the veils that you can see in the background that he designed with Belgian artist Jean-Pierre Muller, next. The museum also acquired a number of works, including this, which is Michel Magema's Hevea Memories, in honor of her mother and her grandmother, next. And Eme Ntakiika's Family History Family Tree #1, which is an installation of jars filled with yarn and with the names of his family on the labels, next. Previously, the museum had acquired Chéri Samba's painting Reorganization, which was painted in 2002. It depicts a literal tug of war between museum staff and members of the African diaspora in Belgium, next. The two sides are fighting over one of the most well-known sculptures in the museum, known as the Leopard Man, a 1913 sculpture by Paul Huissart that has come to symbolize the racist colonialist perspective at the foundation of the museum. Next. Yes, okay. Certain figures in the painting are recognizable, including Guido Greiserls, who was then the director of the museum. You can see him looking at himself if you look at the left, the guy in the suit. In the lead up to the opening, a portrait photograph of the director in front of this large reproduction was made available for press use in any coverage of the events. Next. And it illustrated the section called The Museum's New Philosophy in the press packet. Next. Today, the painting is one of the first artworks visitors see when they enter the renovated museum as a large reproduction that has been installed on a wall immediately before the entrance to the introductory gallery. Next. One thing that really struck me during the opening weeks was the rhetoric around decolonizing the museum and how the museum itself embraced that phrase. For example, the press packet featured this quote that said, "The work of the artist, which was inspired by our collections, definitively offers added value for the museum, accompanying its focus on decolonization. In addition to this, artists can also fill the gaps in the museum's collection in a poetic way." End quote. Next. The majority of press reviews I read also talked about decolonizing the museum, sometimes as the main headline, and I featured headlines in the 3 main languages spoken in Brussels. Next. Counter-protesters and press conferences also discussed decolonization, and they explicitly stated that decolonization is impossible without restitution. And on the right, there's actually a great work of art that's evoking the film that was discussed in the last presentation of Statues Die as well. Next. As I was observing the various events and reading the coverage, my #1 reaction to museum comments was like, I don't think you know what I don't think that word means what you think it means. So what does it mean? There are many different answers to what decolonizing an institution might mean, but I'll highlight just a few so that we're all on the same page. Next. In one part of the academy in the global north, theorists like Walter Mignolo and Anibal Quijano have gained prominence thanks to their writings on what's called the coloniality of power, which posits coloniality as the dark side of modernity. For these writers and others in their circle, coloniality is different from colonialism in that it specifically refers to the importance of colonization as a foundation of modernity and of the Renaissance all the way up until today. So decoloniality, which is a response to European oppression, has also therefore existed for centuries. And the core idea that they have is the colonial matrix of power, which they developed to illustrate how power works within modernity. Next. Within Native studies, which in the United States context tends to refer to indigenous peoples and settler colonies in the US, but also Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the most cited scholars writing about decolonizing, I think, are Linda Tuawai Smith and Eve Tuck and Kei Wang Yang. Smith first published her book, Decolonizing Methodologies, Research, and Indigenous Peoples, in 1999, so way before a lot of the recent attention has been given. And her book aimed to make explicit the imperial and colonial aspects of research as experienced by the communities being researched. Smith argued that a key part of decolonization is bringing indigenous histories into the academy, and this must be a part of a larger project that reaches beyond the ivory tower to change lived experiences outside the academy. Next. 13 years after that, Tuck and Yang published their now famous article, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, in response to what they viewed as a trend of conflating decolonizing with other ways of advocating for various social justice causes. For them, decolonization demands return of resources and especially of stolen land. When decolonization becomes a metaphor, its hard edges get muted and it becomes an empty signifier. So taken to its logical conclusion, a decolonized ethnographic museum in Europe would be one that no longer exists. Collections would have to be returned to the former colonies, now countries, and the buildings repurposed. Next. The day that the Africa Museum reopened to the public, the French magazine Le Point published an article by Valérie Marin-Le titled "Brussels, Must We Decolonize the Africa Museum?" For the article, La Meslay interviewed some of the Belgians with the most prominent voices in the debate about the direction of the museum and what decolonizing the museum might mean. And I'm only going to say a few because of time. Guido Grijsels, who was the director of the museum, stated that decolonizing the museum must include more information about how objects were taken out of Africa and new partnerships with organizations both in Africa and in Europe. And this seems to be what most museums seem to do when it comes to decolonizing. Mireille Chuti-Robert, the founder of BAMCO, a women's anti-racist activist group, proposed the creation of a new decolonized museum, leaving the current museum as a museum of colonialism. So leave it there as like, this is what colonialism looked like, let's do something new. And then finally, Elikia Mbokolo, a professor of history at EHESS in Paris, defined the main problem. He said, not many people know what decolonizing such a museum can even mean. So it seemed to me that the museum thought that it was decolonizing because it was acknowledging the colonial past and that the colonial past was bad. Personally, I don't see how a museum in Belgium, whose very building was funded by money from colonial profits, which houses plants, animals, and ethnographic objects or artworks from Congo, which is currently funded by the Belgian government, and which doesn't even provide visa-free travel to Congolese people to see their heritage, I don't see how that can be decolonized. So, leaving the question, what is this contemporary art doing in the museum? Next. To answer this question, I first turned to the history of institutional critique in Western art history. The term actually kind of refers to artists who were working in the 60s and the 70s who created art critiquing the institutions in which their works were displayed, sometimes bringing attention to the artificiality of display spaces, the politics of finance in museums, or attention to the underlying concepts of power in the museums as artistic framing devices. A later generation brought new perspectives to the critiques, especially focusing on race and gender. The most famous example, I think, is Fred Wilson's 1992 project, Mining the Museum, at the Maryland Historical Society, which highlighted a different history of Maryland, exposing how the museum had ignored stories of communities of color. So oh no, it's unstable. The Africa Museum's trumpeting of contemporary art ahead of its reopening prompted skepticism in me. Much has changed since Wilson's work in Maryland in 1992, and I was wondering if the museum wanted to be like, hey, look, we did it too. But I don't know. In 2005, Andrea Fraser wrote that, quote, "It is artists as much as museums or the market who, in their very efforts to escape the institution of art, have driven it to its expansion." She further explains that artists expanded the reach of art institutions without upending the power dynamics that they were critiquing. This is because institutions are not a faceless them, but they're made up of artists, public, and staff. Fraser declares, quote, "It's not a question of being against the institution, we are the institution," end quote. Next. At an after party in Brussels, I asked the artist Michelle Magema if she worried that she was being tokenized by the museum, revealing my suspicion that the contemporary artists were being used to make the museum look good without actually doing the work within and behind the scenes. She wasn't concerned. She said that her art does the work of challenging the institution regardless of the institution's intentions. Another artist, Aimé Pane, repeated the phrase petit à petit, little by little, over and over again in my interviews with him, emphasizing that his installation was just a foot in the door to begin decolonizing. In 2018, the museum presented itself as decolonized. 7 years later, it's now broadly agreed upon that decolonizing is a process that might never have a conclusion. In the case of the Africa Museum and the Belgian activist community, artists and curators working within and without the museum are pushing the museum towards decolonization. And the contemporary art on display plays one important role in this decolonial process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we go back to Mary. So Mary, are you ready? Okay. If you can hear us, please, Mary, can you respond? Are you there? And are you ready? Oh, she's not there. Oh, she's there.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, I sent it to you. I don't know if it can be detected from your end. It's kind of hanging from my end.
Did you send it to my email or Vera's email or whose email?
Okay, let me try one more time.
Whose email you send it to?
Actually sent it to you on
My
WhatsApp.
Gmail or BME on WhatsApp.
Oh.
How can I do that from WhatsApp? And actually, I'm long.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry,
let me
everyone.
see. Just
If it's easier, you can also just send it to me and I share the screen for.
can I? Yes. If I forward it straight to you on WhatsApp, Vera, can you get it? Because she sent it to
No,
me on
because I don't
WhatsApp.
have, I'm sorry, I don't have WhatsApp on my computer.
Oh, so Mary, is it still possible to send to our email?
Yes. Let me just do that quickly.
Yeah.
I just
Please.
put it into the chat.
Okay, you can
That's
put
up
it
to
in the
my,
chat, I think.
just put it to you.
Put it in the chat if you
Okay.
can.
Okay.
Very good on Patrick, so I don't know. Go for it now.
Am I allowed to start sharing my screen?
Yes, you should be. Can Vera share
Okay.
screen? Okay.
Mary, can you tell me when you send it to me? Thank you.
Yeah.
Tunde, you can also try to, I just put
Yes, I'm
WhatsApp
also
onto my
trying
computer.
if I can. Yeah.
You can try to forward it to me on WhatsApp,
Yeah, I'm seeing that. But
just loading the chat, so it should work in a moment too.
Okay, I've sent it to your mail, Vera.
Okay, thank you.
And this works. Sorry.
No. To my Gmail or to which one? Checking spam. No, also not in my spam. I didn't receive it. Perhaps a typo? I didn't. I checked the spam too, but Mary, I didn't.
Mary, are you comfortable speaking to the paper without the slide?
Okay, if that's fine, I'm okay, but I really would have loved for.
Wait, I got I got it from Tunde. I'm just trying to see if I can open it on WhatsApp on my computer.
Okay.
But you can already start your presentation while I try to open this. It doesn't.
Okay, so okay, so I'll just go ahead. Hi everyone. Sorry for the delay. So
No.
I'm talking on my name is Mary Otu. I'm a postgraduate student and archaeologist, University of Ibadan, Nigeria. So I'm looking at breaking the glass case, so reclaiming African cultural narrative. So I started off with saying this. It's more like a rhetorical question. So it's given the section, the topic section, it's more like public history and critical museology. So this kind of or sort of forces us to Karen. So this forces us to confront this. Yes. Thank you. So this forces us to confront this question with the challenges of how we collect, narrate, and return African cultural properties across the globe. So today we are trying to rethink not just where these objects are, but whose stories they tell and who gets to tell them. So this is why I had to come up with this topic, breaking the glass case, reclaiming African cultural narrative in museums. So next slide, please. So I painted a scenario. Yeah, just keep pressing, more like a glass metaphor. So here, I looked at it in the case of please just keep pressing the slide, it will come up. So the glass case metaphor is more like by the side you see a picture of a small red box which has in case of emergency break the glass. So here I see that in most buildings we have this red mountain box on the wall, and it's like a small glass that says a sign that says in case of emergency break the glass. So it's more like this is the last resort and it's a moment of truth. So when the glass case breaks, it means that it's a signal that something can wait. So actions needs to be taken. So this is why we are told that the African cultural narrative or African cultural heritage has long been still behind a metaphorical glass case, and then it is time for us to actually tell the stories of the stories of how they are and what is needed. So going over to the third slide, please. Yeah, that was just yeah. Okay, so the third slide, yes, just keep pressing. Thank you. The third slide here. So why does this matter is in the sense that reclaiming African cultural narratives requires decolonization, it requires community engagement and innovative creation strategies for cultural heritage. So this was I just had to come up with this picture. You'll see that on one part of the picture here we have while Western style displays emphasize objects behind the glass, and more like in the museum where we have back home here, it's more like a participatory kind of setting. So here in a community center creation and bring stories to life, they take you through the process. So they tell you each story as they go. So it's like I said, it's time to shift the narrative. So from silent display to dynamic storytelling, from possessions to partnership, and from isolation to community creation. Next slide, please. So what's the problem actually with the glass case? I'm looking at the Colonial Framework in Museum. Press next, please. So here I'm going to be using a case study of the British punitive expedition of Benin in 1897, which happened in Nigeria. So I had to bring them through the series. So first, looking at the colonial extraction, using the case study, you see that the British invasion in the Kingdom of Benin, okay, which is the present-day Nigeria, was I'll say it was a retaliation for an early conflict. So you see that they burned the royal palace and looted thousands of priceless artifacts. So this included the bronze plate, the ivory tusk, and other ancestral heads, which we know today to be as the Benin bronze. Then when we go over to artifact acquisition, we have looting and creation. You see that the British soldiers and officials, like, they took this artifact by force. Okay, so many were sold to pay for the cost of the military expedition, and this acquisition was not consensual. So it was rather than more like a theft, and this actually had a lot of effect on this during this period. And then when you now go over to Western cataloging, we see that once these artifacts are actually in Europe, once they are in European hands, So you see that artifacts that are being cataloged in Western museums are under general terms like either primitive or tribal arts. Meanwhile, they lose its original names, uses, and even meanings. Even meanings are lost and ignored. So, whereby you see that the historical records of these artifacts are not properly displayed, but rather most times they're just displayed as decorative objects. And then when we look at the museum display itself, like the Benin bronze and among other African artifacts, they display without cultural context, or you see that they're not imputed or they're not kept in their community of origin. Most viewers who see these objects um, sees them as object of curiosity, and they are as they're not being sacred or historically rich items, so they are shown as more like relics of vanished people, despite the fact that these people still exist. So this is how most times this is how these artifacts are being displayed. And then there's also the issue of misinterpretation. These items are often described in language that emphasize their maybe their exotic nature rather than rather than their real importance or significance. You see, for example, like the word primitive, it was rather used, especially used if you go through the era of the slave trade, to imply inferiority, and this has actually caused a lot of misinterpretation on how these artifacts are actually presented, and also public perception of this object or artifact. We see that this has caused is sort of stereotype, and does portray Africans as being uncivilized or lacking culture. Meanwhile, the true cultural and historical voices behind these artifacts were actually silent. Next slide, please. So here I'm talking about what needs to change. Now, you see that object speaks, okay, but we must speak. But we must speak if we must allow them to speak their mother tongue. So this means that they have stories, they have meanings, and their message are encoded within them. But they can only speak truthfully if we interpret them through the language, worldview and knowledge system of the cultures they came from. So first, who interprets and why it matters. I see interpretation as power because the way objects are actually labeled or contextualized and explained in museums shapes public understanding. So if the interpretation is controlled by Western institutions, it reflects colonial biases. It's often minimizing the object's spiritual, political, or communal significance. So, and this matters because why does this matter? This is because if this is not properly interpreted, it will lead to misinterpretation. It will flatten the culture. It will reinforce stereotypes. Okay. So the second one, when I said African knowledge systems are dynamic and not static relics. So here, oftentimes these objects are being frozen, if I should use the word. So they are actually being frozen. So as if these African societies no longer exist or they don't evolve. So this approach try to dehumanize the people and disconnect artifacts from living tradition. Meanwhile, in reality, we see that the African knowledge systems are more of oral, they are formative, they are communal, and they are over time they are evolving. Then when we say display without
Hi, Mary. I'm sorry to cut you short. Can you please just try to conclude like in 4 minutes so that we can have 10 minutes for Q&A at least? Sorry to cut you short.
Okay, that's fine. So I say museums display without community voice. So here it's more like the objects being displayed creates a one-sided narrative. So, and this leads to cultural silencing, and community voice is actually vital because it helps to restore cultural, historical, and ritual meanings that it might give to that particular object. Next slide, please. So the Pioneer Initiative, a growing movement. So over time, this has been a discussion that has been going up. So here I tried to bring out several institutions that have tried to see how we could actually decolonize this object. So here we have the Talking Object Archives. So here it's a participatory archives co-created for African communities. So they try to see how they can bring back these artifacts and then, try to bring it back to the base and give it its own meaning as it should be. So these are some of the institutions that are trying to make this possible. So we have the Talking Object Archives, we have the International Inventory Program, we have the Open Restitution Africa, Digital Binning, and Reconnecting Objects. Next slide, please. So let's reimagine creation in Africa. So here it's more like what I was trying to explain or put here is it's like, let's see how we can include local communities, elders, artisans, historians, and cultural practitioners who are actually involved in creating exhibition, choosing narrative and framing cultural meaning to objects. So once all of this is being put in place, we can see that it helps us to better interpret or give meaning to most of these objects. So it's not just regular having to walk through a museum or in a museum where there are silent hall and glass beads, halls of glass and labels. Meanwhile, this is not being participatory. So this will lead to I think with this, you could actually see us on how we can truly or properly imagine creation in Africa. So I came in to emphasize, I had to list out all of this, emphasize community consultation, co-creation, and all of this you're seeing on the screen. Next slide, please. So also is the innovative display strategy. Now, with the advent of technology, there are better ways to which we can do. The example is what the Talking Object Archive is doing. They try to see how they can digitize this object and make it open to the public. I think they have that on their website. So once you go to their website, it gives you the platform to walk around some objects and see the changes and see what it's there. So so this can be done through immersive tech, performing storytelling, participatory exhibits, mobile or open air museum. Next slide, please. So also there are I won't actually come up with this without having to look at other approaches from the and without it not being interdisciplinary. So here we have archaeology, and we also have digital humanities, and we have oral history. So with the incorporation of all of this, it will help create a richer and a more accurate and inclusive interpretation. Like for archaeology, for example, it will help us to look at the historical and cultural context of uncovering, the origin, use, and meaning of artifacts over time. So same goes with digital humanities and oral histories. So all of this discipline are actually needed for us to properly interpret or changing the narrative. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So my final reflection and call to action is it's time for us to break the glass case. So to move beyond the passive display and open museum spaces to dialogue, dignity, and deeper understanding. So this means that by reclaiming African narrative and reconnecting with source communities and reimagine creation as a collaborative and living process. So here we have to we need different intellects. We need scholars, we need curators, we need artists, we need even the visitor, to play a role in this transformation. So together we can shift, We can shift museum from colonial repositories and make it an inclusive space for cultural renewal. So this was how I just had to coin it, like a call to action. How will you help break the glass case? Next slide, please. And then the final, the final here is it's more like a rhetorical question that I asked. So if given the chance, what question would you ask the object in the case? And another question there is, how would these artifacts speak differently if they were displayed in their original communities? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. And I'm sorry for the issue with technology. We are almost out of time, but I think we should take a couple of questions. Maybe people will just note the question and not respond. I don't know. Well, I just want people to say something. Vera, what do you think? You have questions?
It's such a pleasure to have this. One question to all of you, you mean?
Go ahead. If you have a question for all the speakers, that will be fine.
Yeah, I think what is really important, what came out of the different talks, is how we have to get away from keyword dropping. I mean, just the term decolonization that very often is used, yeah, in ways which have nothing. I mean, as you've pointed out in different contexts, for rather for career building or for the whitewashing of institutions. And not really for the cause for which we would have to argue. And I do think if you could all say, perhaps with one sentence, how, from your perspective, you think we could get away from the ways how institutions and also researchers use keywords in abstracts, in let's say exhibition descriptions, in titles of exhibitions, and to get to the actual practices. And because I think this is something that you've all touched upon in your different presentations, different contexts. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to go first? Yes, just the way you presented. Yes.
One sentence, we must be concerned with material reality and work with community.
And I think what really struck me across all of the presentations is similarly, it's about connections between people, more so than words and things, actually. So they are important too.
Katerina?
Yes, I also think that connection and relation would be the key approach rather than rather than decolonization as in more than an abstract term, I would say. So connection that is materially performed, a connection between the curators and artists, connection between the communities and artists, connection between different members of the community.
Thank you. And Mary, anything to add to that question?
Okay, so basically, yeah, I would say objects are actually important. So not just objects, the artifacts, as far as they speak, so they need to be properly preserved, and also they need to connect with the communities from where they come from. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing that I have actually been not necessarily struggle, but kind of amazes me about the colonization, is it as a concept or as a movement or as a metaphor, as a methodology, practice, whatever. I don't know really what it is. And I don't really know how, and I think you did a very good job, like looking at, how different people really see what is decolonization. And when you talk about decolonization, especially, museum objects, particularly about, let's say, African object and, of course, object from Global South in general. It seems there's a lot of academic talk, going on in the North about this stuff in the Global South. And the people down there are not really don't know what's going on. I mean, they are not even part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a problem, or what do you think can be done? How do we bring it to people themselves in the Global South? Yes.
So most of my research is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think in 2019, I was there and I asked a friend who's an artist, a Congolese artist, and I said, what do you think about all of this talk about decolonizing museums? And he goes, sounds like a European problem. Yeah. And at the time, it really was like European museums were obsessed with it. Yeah. And Africans and African museum workers were like, what? Okay, sure. Have fun. And then it was also a lot of this issue with restitution where it's like, and we therefore want to give you all of these objects. And then so many people on the continent are like, and are you going to give us the money to build the place, to store all of these things you're going to force us to take from you? So it felt like you can probably tell that this paper grew out of a frustration of a lot of people talking past each other and not to each other.
Yeah.
Yes. To be honest, I'm a bit stuck. And so I work on Afro-Latin America from the United States because, well, that's where I was able to get resources to do so. But by that virtue, I just did my first year as a PhD. It was really hard to actually look at Latin America because the voices, we're not emphasizing those. We're emphasizing the global North voices. And my research then, I was like, okay, let me instead look from Mexico outwards. But like I was telling you all about with that hurricane that had happened, if we're actually looking at what's happening in Mexico, you can't ignore the United States. You can't ignore the global North because of the way that neo-colonialism continues to operate. And so I don't know, I call mine illegitimizing. And so there is right now a change in power. And I'm just staying tuned. There's a lot that's happening. I'm holding on.
Yeah. Anybody want to have anything to say online before we call it now and get ready for the next panel? What time is it?
This is 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay. Vera and everyone online, thank you so much for coming. The next panel, which is the third panel for this session, starts in 15 minutes. And we really encourage you online if you can also join us in that panel so that perhaps we have time to continue the discussion. So see you in 15 minutes if you are able to join us. And thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Many, many thanks. Tunde, I sent everything to Daniel via WhatsApp and via email.
Okay,
see you in
thank
15
you.
minutes.
Okay. Thank you. We're lucky with the connection.